This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity.
Today, we'll be talking about satisfaction and engagement with one's work. We've heard so much about the great resignation movement that is taking place now and what I'd call the age of the employee. Our discussion with Fran explores the employee's perspective of job and career fulfillment. So many employees are leaving companies that they've been with for many years, and we wonder what's different. What's driving them to leave now?
And what struck me in listening to Fran is these kinds of issues are going on inside all of us. And we tend to call them trends, or we tend to look at the numbers. And when it's an individual story, you start to recognize the core questions each of us needs to ask. And the one that is clear from Fran's story is the culture I'm currently in a fit or aligned with what engages me as a worker? And I just want to encourage people that are listening, if the answer is clearly no, and the culture's not in shift of any time, get started looking for the right fit sooner rather than later.
We hope you'll be as energized as we were by our conversation with Fran, and that you'll get some great nuggets as both a manager and a leader and as an employee.
Thank you for listening.
Fran, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to hear your story of finding the courage and accepting the vulnerability to take your career journey on a shift after more than 31 years at the same company, and then deciding to start anew. So thank you for your time today.
Sure, no problem.
Why don't we start by asking you to just share a little bit about your career journey, the industry you're in, your type of role, company size. What was the culture like, to give us a picture of where you started and where you went?
Okay. So my background is accounting. That's what my degree is in. I'm also a CPA. So when I started my career, I started out at a large public accounting firm, doing financial audits. Um, I decided to go into smaller business audit because I figured that doing it that way, I would get broader experience earlier on in my career, by being able to see a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries early on instead of, going in and auditing one company for a whole year. So I went into small business audit. And that was kind of when I started to, kind of have an appreciation or a liking towards smaller businesses instead of, larger multinationals. Turned out to be a great decision because in the time that I spent in public accounting, which was about 3.5 years, I was able to see a broad, range of industries. I was able to do not only auditing, but special projects because these were smaller companies that needed, financial expertise. So it was a great start to my career, spent about 3.5 years doing that. And then I went out of public accounting into private industry. I was actually hired on by one of my managers at my public accounting firm, had left and gone to a company that was, it was about 3,000 employees at the time, about less than $1 billion in revenue, privately held company. And it was located in the Chicago area. The corporate headquarters were in the Chicago area. So I decided to leave public accounting because I really didn't like auditing and that sort of work. And I went into private industry at that point. I started out doing accounting at the company that I went to, so I was doing like the consolidations, um, basic accounting, and then I transitioned into financial planning and analysis. I did that for a few years. I got promoted and became an accounting manager. So I went back to accounting for a while, and I had, people working for me. So I got that managerial experience. And then the company decided to implement an ERP system, which is an enterprise resource planning system. I always had kind of had an interest in systems as well as, finance and accounting. And so I volunteered to be on this project where we were going to implement, this system to basically run the entire company, all of the different functions of the company. And I would be the financial representative on the project. So making sure that, we're addressing all of the financial issues during the system implementation project. It turned out to be the pivotal point of my career and also the best experience, I think, of my career. Because I got out of that, accounting, finance kind of transactional world where, you had constant deadlines and, things like that to deal with. And I went more into a project oriented world. Where every day it was different. You were learning about the company and how all of the different parts of the company interact, all of the different functions, and then ultimately the impact of that on the financials. So while I still was in the financial world, I kind of was branching out to learn more about how businesses actually operate, and then how at the end of the day the finances come together. The project team, it was well staffed. They pulled people out of their day jobs, and we were 100% dedicated to the project. They put us through training on the system, so I got very deep knowledge in ERPs and how they work, and in particular the one that we implemented at the company that I was at. And I enjoyed working in a team environment. That was the other thing is, not just the fact that my work was now project oriented, but I was working in a team. And I really liked that because I felt like you get different people's perspectives and you come up with the best answer when you're getting a lot of different perspectives on how to do something. So I did that for the project took a couple years to implement. And then after that, pretty much every role that I've been in has been in this financial systems world, where I'm kind of crossing between finance and IT, working on systems implementations, reporting off of systems, business analytics off of those systems, those types of roles. So over that time of those experiences and working on this project, about 15 years had passed. So
Wow.
it was I did a lot in the 15 years of basic accounting and then kind of finance and then a system implementation and then supporting a system going forward. In that time the company had more than doubled in size, and we were acquired by a large public company. So that's kind of when things started to change. Was I went from working at a very kind of family oriented almost private company to being part of now a large public company.
Fran, before we talk about some of the shifts that happen, I want to lock in some observations and have you confirm them or embellish them, because
Okay.
Adrian and I work on talent optimization. So since today is the first time I've met you, I'm hearing some things that are important. One, I hear that you want your piece to be relevant to the bigger picture.
Yes.
And just doing what you do well doesn't seem to be fulfilling unless it's related to a bigger picture.
Correct.
And I'm also hearing that you want to work with other people who are good at what they do and work together to get the pieces to fit. And
Mhm.
again, back to that same thing about the cog not being enough. And then another piece, because as we go on your journey, we'll see where some of these things are missing that becomes clear is that you want to be challenged. And I heard that in your very first role, how you say, it was really exciting because you were doing something you hadn't done before. But then once you were doing it regularly, do I just want to do this for another 50 years? And the answer was no. So are those some
Correct.
accurate observations about what excites you and fulfills you and your work style?
Yeah, I would say they're very accurate. And, being, especially with an accounting degree, I mean, people generally think of accountants as kind of, dull and dull and boring and,
Debit,
rigid,
credit, and we just
very,
do
And we
that
know you're
forever.
not that.
Not at all.
yeah,
And,
very rigid.
and it's a stereotype that doesn't fit anyway, but it's fun to,
Yeah, yeah. And that definitely, like, I am very like, my logical thinking skills are definitely very, very, very like fine-tuned, and I'm very analytical. So from that perspective, I fit into, the whole accounting finance world. But the repetitiveness of the tasks were not for me. And then I like interacting with people, and I like working on teams, and that definitely didn't fit the mold of, a typical, definitely a typical accounting role. I mean, some finance roles, you interact more with people and with leadership and things like that, which, I had some of those experiences as well. But yeah, I think you're right on. It was like I didn't just want to do the debits and credits. I wanted, a broader view of the business, and also, working in a team environment and being more interactive.
well, thank you for that. And you were starting to talk about a culture shift, but I just wanted to lock all that in. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So it, it just became, the culture became very different working at, in a large public company. So I endured it for, another 15 years. And when I think back on it, I can't believe that I actually survived that long in that environment. I think what kept me going was I was working, on projects. So I had veered off into this, financial systems world. And so like a new project would come up and I would be thinking, well, that sounds interesting. Let's
Just
try that.
enough newness to keep you
That'll get
going.
me through another year or two. And I'll see how it goes.
Mhm.
And I think that's really what happened is, for the next 15 years, I wasn't as happy as I was, under the previous structure of the company, but I kept going because I still was enjoying the work I was doing. And I still was learning, right? Because it was, we were putting in new systems, especially once we got acquired, merging into the new company, learning their systems, trying to figure out how to get, the original company's data into the new company's format, that kind of thing. So it was interesting and challenging enough that it kept me there. But the cultural differences in working for a large public company versus a smaller private company got to me. And so after, 30 plus years, I decided, not that I never thought about leaving. I did think about leaving several times along the way. And, occasionally I would go out there and, start sort kind of trying to look informally, right? But I didn't dedicate a lot of time to it. I just was casually kind of looking to see what jobs were out there. And I would have recruiters call me now and then. And I'd listen. I had a few interviews here and there, over the years, but nothing ever, really captured my attention or was interesting enough to make me leave after all that time. But
Could you
during
talk about a little bit about when you think back to the first company, the private company, compared to the large public company? What were some of the things, the experiences that were different for you? And could those have been replicated at scale in the larger organization, do you think?
Yeah. I think what was really different is in a larger company, it seems like the roles are very, I don't want to say restrictive, but they're very kind of narrowly defined, you know. So you are a specialist in one specific thing, and that's what you focus on. Whereas in a smaller company, you kind of are a jack of all trades in a lot of ways because there just aren't, there aren't enough people to be specialists in every,
Mhm.
small little aspect of the company. And so I noticed that a lot in working for a larger company was that the roles seem to be just not as broad. Like the responsibilities weren't as broad as some of the roles that you would have in a smaller company. And then the teamwork aspect of it, like, and it may just have been the company that I was at, the large public company that I worked for, but I felt like it wasn't very collaborative. It was more the management styles were like focus on our team's tasks, and if somebody over there asks you to do something, say no.
It's a
Because
control issue, isn't it?
it
That you
kind of,
narrowly define it because then you know which pieces are responsible for what rather than communicating
yeah,
agreements.
yeah. And I think, in larger public companies, I think that there's so much of a focus on goals, like what are my specific goals for the year? And I saw this a lot, at the company that I worked for. What are my goals for the year? And the focus is I need to make sure my goals are achieved so that I could get my bonus, get the next
Mm.
promotion, whatever it might be. And of course, we should be goal oriented, and we should want to make sure that we meet our goals. But what I was seeing was, then if you're so focused on just your specific goals, and your colleague needs help with something, you don't have, you're like, well, I don't, if I spend time helping you, then I'm going to, not be able to work on my specific tasks. So I'm going to ignore you, so that I could make sure I meet my goals, get my bonus, get my promotions. You know what I mean?
And if
And
you're
so there was a,
collaborative, that's a strain. That's hard. It's hard for
yeah,
you
it was very hard for me.
to turn
I
away helping
yeah,
someone. Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah. And in the type of role that I'm in, in a systems role where you're working, across functional lines. I wasn't just working for accounting and finance. I was working with business people and trying to make sure that what we were setting up for them was going to work for them.
Right.
And I was, it was kind of like if I went off and veered off and tried to make sure that from a business perspective, we were meeting the goals, it was like, well, that's not your problem. Focus over here because we have to make sure the debits and credits work. So it just became very difficult.
What was the breaking point? 15 years is a long time to endure,
Yeah,
right? You said I endured for another 15 years. So
yeah,
something must have really been a breaking point, a pivotal point for you to say this is not enough. I don't belong here.
yeah,
Do you remember those
yeah.
moments?
I think what happened. I mean, there were several, there were several kind of pivotal
Mhm.
moments. A lot of what was happening was, um, there was a lot of layoffs and workforce reductions, and that also, being part of a larger public company, there's a lot of focus on cost control. And when you're in a support function, finance, accounting, IT, type function that I was in, those are the areas that get cut. They don't cut the
Yeah.
salespeople and the people that are generating revenue, they cut the overhead.
Mhm.
And so that was happening over time, right? It was a lot of cost cutting, restructuring, reducing the workforce. Well, as you reduce the workforce, those that are left, have to take on more, right? So the workload started to become really unmanageable. That was one big thing that was happening. The other thing was outsourcing. Um, so, I over the years I watched different functions get outsourced, and a lot of the outsourcing in finance and IT, especially in IT, um, they move those functions outside of the United States so that they could get lower cost labor. And so I would watch as my colleagues, people that I had worked with for years, as they would have to train, the outsourced resources that were coming in, and basically they were training them to take over their jobs, and that just became, it just weighed on me, right? Because I'm watching people lose their jobs and, have to train their successors, and it just wore on me over
So there's a
time.
combination of not feeling secure in your job combined with not really feeling fulfilled. So it's
Or
one
valued
thing you
maybe.
could feel fulfilled and not be secure, and that's not pleasant, but you can bear it. But you're not secure. They could say go any day. So, and you're not fulfilled. So maybe it's you that should say go any day.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there always was kind of that cloud, right? It was like this dark cloud kind of hanging over you, like, okay, am I next? But
Of course.
you really didn't know. And I saw people that were smart, people that were really good at their jobs lose their jobs. And it was just it's sad. I mean, really sad and kind of demoralizing. So I think, those couple of things. And then I think, there's all this talk about the great resignation, right? The wave of people like me leaving their jobs after so
Right.
many years. I think with the pandemic and just everybody kind of slowing down, I think that's really what made me do this, right? I had more time on my hands because we weren't going out with friends. We weren't going out to dinner. We didn't have all that socialization
Right.
that we were used to that took up our weekends, right? It was kind of like everything stopped, for a year or two. And during that time is when I kind of, got more serious about how much longer can I do this, right? I'm getting to the point, I'm in my mid 50s. I'm not really going to be working that much longer, but another 10 years or so.
Too long
And
to endure.
too long to
Yeah,
endure.
to
Like, could I
just endure.
possibly do
Yeah.
this for another 10 years? And the
Mhm.
answer was no. Um, and so I had that time, during the pandemic, and I think this is what's happening with what happened with other people as well is, you have more time to reflect on your life. And, I was reflecting on what am I spending my time on and my energy on. And I was thinking about how frustrated I would be, by the end of the week, and how on Sundays I was just like, and my family even noticed it, right? On Sundays, I would be the biggest grouch because I was thinking, oh my God, I have to go back to this on Monday and do it all over again for another week. And so, yeah, I think it was that kind of slowdown of all of our lives that made me sort of take a step back, reflect a little bit more on, what do I need to make me happy and fulfilled? And it wasn't what I was doing, for I want to say 40 hours a week, but it was 60 hours a week was
Mhm.
the kind of hours, 60, 70 hours a week, the type of hours that I was working. And I just thought I can't do this anymore. So I spent more time trying to find another role. Um, I was super picky about what I was looking for because I didn't want to move and, go to the same type of environment. I didn't want to move to another company that had the same sort of dynamics going on. So I was looking for kind of what I started with,
Uh-huh.
at my second company that I went to, the privately held company, a company that's large enough that they had enough going on to keep it interesting, especially from a systems perspective, but small enough that it wasn't, didn't have some of the disadvantages of larger companies. And I ended up finding that ultimately, I mean, it took me, more than a year of pretty concerted effort. And, I didn't even have that many interviews. Honestly, I think I only interviewed with maybe 3 companies, because I didn't even put my resume in if I didn't think it was like almost a perfect fit, because I wasn't going to give up
Yeah,
everything that I had worked for 30 years,
yeah,
just to go to another company and have the same sort of dynamics happening.
Fran,
Um,
imagine for a second before we hear about your transition that I am a new manager and I don't want to outsource you and I don't want to lose you after 30 years and really want to and pick up that you're sending signals that you're not getting much joy and you're working your tail off for little return. What kind of conversations might have had you at least consider that we're the company you want to work for?
yeah. So the I did have some conversations with, my manager at the public company. Actually, the last year that I was there, I was working for a new manager who had come in, from another company, and he actually was a really great guy. Probably one of the best managers that I've ever worked for, which is kind of ironic, because he came in, right at the tail end of my tenure there. Um, and I had conversations with managers before that too about some of the things that were bothering me. But with this particular manager, the last one that I had there, I had a pretty good relationship with him, and was pretty open and honest with him. And I would tell him the things, that were happening that were bothering me, and he did try to make some changes, to make it more tolerable. The problem was, it wasn't the work itself, right? It was more everything around it. It was the culture and kind of how the company operated, how they ran their projects. And it was too big of a problem for this one manager, right, to really be able to correct the ship and make it so that I could be happy. The other thing is, he was a great guy, but the turnover there was constant, right? I knew that in another year I would have a new manager, and that person might not be as,
So what you needed was beyond his capacity within that culture,
yeah,
but he at least opened up so that he heard from
yes,
you what
yeah,
your concerns were.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
so why don't you start taking us through what it was like to seek new employment after 31 years? I mean, the the process is different. So different, right? And so what was that like? What were the responses that you got, and
Yeah,
just that experience overall?
yeah. I mean, it was difficult.
Yeah.
People don't stay at companies for that long anymore. And so I kind of felt like I was this oddball, out there in the market. And what I ended up doing was, when I updated my resume, I had updated it kind of very sporadically over the years, just in case, like I said, there were points in time where I was like, yeah, I need to find a new job, and I'd update it.
You get
But what I
frustrated
ended up,
enough. I might need this.
yeah, what I ended up doing was kind of, even though I had 30 years at the same company, I broke it up into like the roles and the projects that I had worked on. And I almost made it look like I was changing jobs, like every every time I had like a new project that I was working on, on my resume, it almost looked like I was changing jobs. Um, and I think that helped, that helped a little bit to make it, to make myself a little bit more marketable, to make it apparent that even though I had been at the same company for so long, my experiences were so diverse.
You didn't do the same
Um,
thing for all that time.
yeah, I didn't do the same thing, definitely. And so that helped. but I wasn't getting a lot as I was, putting my resume out there, I wasn't getting a lot of traction. I wasn't hearing a lot back. And so then I was like, well, that's odd because I had this, I went to U of I, had a, um, degree from a great school. I was a CPA. I had public accounting experience with a large firm. And I had all of this, accounting, finance, all the systems background, and I wasn't hearing back
Yeah, you
a
had the
lot.
credentials. So what was it?
I had the credentials, right? So then I'm like, okay, even though I don't feel like I'm old, I'm in the marketplace. I'm older, And
Mhm.
so I then adjusted my resume to kind of take dates out. Like I didn't have on there, when I graduated college or, like any dates like that. And I had it focus more on the last like 15 years or so, like, more of the time frame when I was doing more of the systems work. And just by making that change, like taking dates out, I started to hear back a lot more. So,
Wow.
um, I think it was kind of eye-opening for me, just the impact of, how you present yourself on a resume, what an impact that can have on, the opportunities then that you're able to, um, pursue. So, but it was hard, and I wasn't used to interviewing. I mean, I did interviewing internally at the company that I was at as I would, move on to new roles. I had a little bit of interview experience from that perspective, but I didn't have, with going to another company and presenting myself. So, I kind of, I think the first interview that I went on when it was over, I was like, that was awful. you know, just thinking about how I responded to some of the questions and that sort of thing. And I think I got better at it, as time went on. But, for me, just being open and honest and just being myself is that's just like who I am. So I'm not one, even in interview situations, like I can't really put on a front very well. I think I'm just too like honest of a person.
And nor should
Um,
you, because you
Yeah.
can't do that for 31 years.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
want people who want you as you are, not as you
Yeah.
think
yeah,
they think you're
yeah,
supposed to be.
yeah. And
And
so,
that's true of age too. You don't get experience in a year.
yep,
Yep.
yeah, exactly.
You get it in
Um,
the 30 years.
yeah. So I think I became more relaxed, during the few interviews that I had. And I felt like, I went into it thinking I have nothing to lose, right? I had a job. It wasn't like I was unemployed. So I was lucky in that perspective. And I knew what I was looking for. And if, the job that I was interviewing for didn't fit, and, then it wasn't meant to be. Um,
And I
so
think
it,
that's the critical piece there is that you did the thinking to really reflect on what are the work experiences that are important to me?
mhm,
What is the environment that is important to me that resonates with me, that aligns with not only my style, but my values?
mhm,
And you sought that out specifically and you didn't compromise.
yep,
And too many times we set those things aside because the offer's really good, maybe the money's really good, but guess what? Couple years in,
yeah,
how much will that matter, right?
yep,
If it's not aligned with your values, it's not a culture that works with your own styles and preference. And you found it. So you were
yeah,
bold enough to say no thank you to the things that didn't fit, to the places
mhm,
that didn't fit. You found a place where you are happy and you enjoy the work. And so what was that transition like then? Now you're the new kid on the block. What does
yeah.
that experience feel like?
Yeah. So It was harder than I expected. It really was. I guess I was a little bit disillusioned and thinking I have all this experience and, I know what I'm doing and I'm just going to hit the ground running, right? I went in there thinking I am going to save the day because they're implementing a new ERP system, not the same one that I worked with at my previous company. So again, I was actually surprised they hired me because I'm thinking I don't have experience in this particular software. But I had all the other components of, what they wanted. And basically the project that I got hired to work on was not going well. They had been going at it for over a year, and they were having all kinds of issues on the finance side where they weren't putting the pieces together. The thing that I kind of specialized in is figuring out how to, make the business pieces come together correctly for the financials at the end. They were having all kinds of problems, so they hired me even though I didn't have experience with the software. And so I had to not only learn a new business. Some of the things that they did were similar, business wise, as what I did at my previous company. So that helped. But I'm learning a new business. It's new people. I don't know the organization. I don't know how it's structured. I don't know who does what. Um, I don't know, where people are located with joining a company during the pandemic. Everyone's working remotely. We're actually going back to the office next week for the first time. So that's going to be interesting, to actually see people in person. But yeah, I'm working remotely. I'm not, meeting people face to face.
Right.
It was really difficult. Um, Now I'm only 2 months in, so it's not like I have all this experience now with the new company, but I've just noticed even over 2 months, like I'm feeling more comfortable now because, I'm learning who are the people and I'm learning the system and things like that. But yeah, I definitely underestimated how difficult the transition was going to be. And I mean, even now it's difficult. And I find, at my previous company, everybody knew who I was. They knew my experience. They knew they could trust me, right?
Hmm.
I go into this new company and they're kind of like, who? Like, who are you? And what I ended up doing was I started to almost give like a little mini resume at the beginning of calls or discussions that I was having with people, like kind of letting people know what my background was before I even started speaking, because I was like, they're going to be like, who is this woman? Like, what, you don't know anything about our company or whatever. So I started kind of doing like a little mini, like, well, here's who I am, here's my experience, here's what I've done in the past. Now, here's what I think you should do. And then I would go into, my
Yeah.
suggestions.
You had to
But
build some credibility again.
yeah, I
That
had to
that was all
build,
inherent when people knew your name and
yeah,
your
yeah,
reputation. Hmm.
yeah. So, just, and I'm still, obviously, it's only been a couple months. So I'm still in that phase now, building credibility, building trust. Um,
Yeah.
with people, figuring out who the players are, who do I talk to for certain things, just all of that. So it's been definitely more challenging than I expected, but in a
But
good way.
worth it?
Like I feel absolutely worth it. And the main reason is the culture, and part of the reason that I chose the company that I moved to was that they were so, like, in the interview process, so focused on culture. They have like a corporate set of values and beliefs, and a lot of them are about teamwork and things like that. But like half of the values and beliefs had to do with like personal things, like enjoying your work and um, being part of a team and, things that resonated with me. So I think that was what kind of put me over the top as far as choosing this company, was that list of values and beliefs, because I was like, wow. And they talk it every day. People will bring it up every day, like, well, um, teamwork is important here, so blah 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 blah. Um, So I think culturally, like it's just been such a great fit. They have their problems and issues. Like the project that I joined, was in kind of a chaotic state, and we're trying to right the ship now, right? And so, that's been challenging, but I'm up for the challenge, and I feel so much more motivated and kind of invigorated because I kind of feel like I have something to prove for one thing, right? So I'm trying to build my reputation up from anew, um, and enjoying just the more team oriented way that this company operates. um, and people seem to care about each other, and some of those walls I was talking about where it's not my job, so I'm not going to help you. I don't see that at all here. People are very collaborative, and definitely team oriented. So I think taking that time to find the right fit was so important for me, and it was well worth it because I think where I ended up, I can be happy here for another 10 years until I can ride off into the sunset, and retire.
That's wonderful. And I think the takeaways for me in you sharing the story of starting anew is that you have found a company that didn't just write their value statements on a piece of paper, ask a couple of questions. Of course, you would say, well, yes, teamwork's important to me. I mean, who's going to be in an interview and say, nah, I don't believe in teamwork, right?
Exactly.
But but you're seeing it in the threads of their behavior,
Hmm.
and that is the important piece.
Yep.
And that's the matchup, and that's you know that's why people leave. We've talked to culture experts on this podcast, and it's the behaviors. It's not the culture statements, it's the behaviors that represent the culture. Really doesn't
Yep.
matter
Mhm.
what the words are.
Yep.
It's the behavior, right?
Absolutely.
And so you found a place that behaves in the way that they've designed it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think one thing to keep in mind for somebody who's in a position like you were, saying, should I recreate myself or should I keep it up for another 10 years? Is, and you didn't say this directly, but it was implicit, how likely is this culture to change?
Mm,
Because your need isn't likely to change because that's who you are. And so the example would be when you had a boss who was one of the best bosses. And the problem there was that he had limited impact on a culture that didn't want to change.
Yep.
And
It's
so
right.
if someone's in that position, they could say, well, it's not likely to change. And I'm uncomfortable at this season in my life, going to interviews, all the things that you confess to being uncomfortable with. But I need to do this for my own fulfillment. And then you become more comfortable when you get out and do it. So
Hmm.
I think that one of the things that repeats is that people think about it longer than they need to. If you're not getting any new information, it's time to do something different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it took you every one of those years to get ready to get ready. But perhaps someone who's listening might say, I think I'm where she was and I'm going to jump a little sooner and save them some of the aggravation that you had internally before you were ready to
Yeah.
act.
Yeah. And, in hindsight, yeah, do I wish I would have done this a few years ago? Yes.
Well, rather
Um,
than regret, you teach others that are
yeah.
saying, I'm going around and around in circles and I'm no longer willing to do that.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, if you're getting those feelings, if in your gut it doesn't feel right anymore, move on. Move on. And for me, making the change, I took a pay cut. I was looking for a specific type of company and a specific type of role. I felt like I found it. I think they did whatever they could do compensation wise. In the end, I'm making less money than I was before. Do I care? Not really. It's like the money is not the most important thing to me. Um, you know, did I have to think about it? Am I willing to do this? Of course. But in the end, when I did my old pros cons, right? My analytical mind, my pros and cons, and the importance of money versus that job satisfaction and wanting to um, improve a company and wanting to work in a more team oriented environment, still doing the work that I like. That was all more important to me than money.
What a wonderful statement. I feel like that's very energizing for any of our listeners who might be at those same crossroads that you were at, and you took the leap and you're happy that you had done it. What a way to wrap.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think it will be helpful. And to the people that are managers, it's your responsibility to find out what these things are. You may not be able to solve it. You might even have to give her a recommendation because it's just not a fit. But if you don't know, and then one day you look up and say, "Where's Fran?" then that's on you. And
Mhm.
so we're in this together in collaboration. Creating fulfilling careers is teamwork.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences, and hopefully it will help some others to find their path and make sure that each day, we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring for any of us, that each day you're as happy as you can be.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you can go to bed at peace knowing you've done what you can do.
Yep. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.